Hi everyone, I'm Sweet Melba. Welcome to Sunday on the Porch. So we're just a little less than 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving. So I'm sure a lot of us are thinking about our Thanksgiving meal and family and friends that are going to be there, getting together, sharing the meal, planning for our decorations and what our Thanksgiving table will look like. And there's going to be some people who won't be there in person, people who are no longer with us, but they're still there with us in spirit and in the stories that we share. And I wanted to spend a little time talking about that today. So thanks for joining me. So, talking about those that we remember who are no longer with us, but yet are still with us at our family table during Thanksgiving. And I think it's really important for all of us to take some time and remember those individuals, the connections we had with them, the memories we had, the fun times, and the life lessons that they taught us. It's that connection, I think, that's really important, and that we make space at the table for those individuals, that we have an opportunity to share and reflect on our time with them, what they contributed to our lives, and just how special they were and continue to be because we continue to share their stories. So today I wanted to spend some time just really honoring some of those individuals in my life. And hopefully you'll do the same and take some moments to remember them and how they contributed to your life. And at the end of the video today, I have an idea that you and your family might want to try this Thanksgiving as a way to remember some special people who are no longer seated at your family table, but are still there with you. One of the very special people to me that's no longer with us is my great grandma. And I was fortunate to grow up with her in my life into my early 20s. And, the life lesson that she taught me was even when we come from hard beginnings or have struggles in our young life, it doesn't limit us. We can still dream and put the time and effort into things that we want to do and overcome those challenges that we may have had in younger life. And it's something I've always remembered. But I just really loved spending time with her. I spent a lot of weekends with her. I would love when she would come and spend time with us at our house. And it was all her old fashioned ways of doing things, the way she did things on the farm when she was growing up. She was born in 1901 in Idaho, and it was pretty hard living. But so many of those old fashioned ways of doing things she continued to do on into her life and shared a lot of those with me. And I remember a lot of those of washing clothes in the sink, even though she had a washing machine. Did just simple things like that and spending time together talking and sharing. So I'll be thinking of her this Thanksgiving. I was also fortunate to grow up with my grandparents on both sides, primarily with my mother's side. So, my maternal grandpa, the lessons he taught me were the simple things in life and making time to enjoy those. He loved having a beer or a glass of wine and having a really good meal and listening to his favorite 8-track tapes in his car of Rosemary Clooney, actually, I remember, but Moon River, things like that. But it was just little things like that that he really enjoyed. And so those were one of the lessons I learned from him. And in regards to that, one of my fondest memories, and this kind of went on as I was growing up, but every time I went to stay with him, I always got a little bit of plum wine in the evening. And I think he did it so that I would sleep better or go to bed sooner. But I always got a little something in terms of wine or a little bit of beer or whatever. So while he was enjoying that, I got to enjoy just a little as well. And I still love plum wine. In my previous video, I shared a little bit about my grandma, again, my maternal grandma, and how she just loved fashion and jewelry. But the lesson I learned from her and that I remember and share stories at Thanksgiving was that, she really reinvented her life. After she raised my mom and my uncle, her and my grandpa got divorced. She had been a wonderful mother and PTA and cookies and all those things that moms did. And but when she got divorced, she reinvented herself and she did everything she loved. She went dancing and she went to work in a jewelry store and worked in jewelry stores until almost the end of her life. She loved jewelry and she loved going out dancing and she did all of that and had so much fun. And one of my memories was actually going with her and her boyfriend, who was a long term boyfriend, pretty much as long as I could remember. But they took me to Disneyland. And this was back in the time when you could go to Disneyland just to go dancing. You didn't have to ride the rides. And that's what they did. I remember seeing them out on the dance floor at the pavilion there at Disneyland in Tomorrowland, dancing to the music and enjoying all of that. And I was sitting there watching them, and everybody just loved watching them dance. So it was a great memory and something I continue to talk about, again, sharing stories of her at Thanksgiving and holidays. I mentioned that I was fortunate that I got to grow up with both grandparents. Now, my paternal grandparents, they lived in Alabama, so they weren't with us. They didn't come out for Thanksgiving, but I spent a lot of summers going there and spending time with them. And one of the lessons I learned from my grandpa was his love for the land. We had family property there, very simple living, nothing fancy by any stretch, but he loved being on the property and he would spend the whole day. And when I was there, we would walk around the property and we would walk to the ponds, we would feed the fish, and we would feed the goats and just walk around the property, visiting other people in the family that lived on the property. And again, this is very simple country living, but I really learned to love the land just like he did. And that's a lesson he taught me. And one of my fondest memories was, again, really just walking around the property with him. And we'd take an old pickup truck loaded up with 5 gallon buckets of fish food, and we'd go down to the ponds that were just a little way down from the house and feed all the fish. And I'd love to see all the fish come up to the top of the pond, and they would actually know he was coming. So we would get down there and they'd hear that truck, I think, and you could see them all popping in the water just before we got down there with all the food. So I would help him throw the food out to the fish, and it was just really fond memory. So things like that I remember, and that we continue to talk about today. And then my paternal grandmother, who I loved spending time with. Again, we went occasionally, or I did for summer vacations and whatnot, but she too, again, they lived a very simple country life, but I loved being there. And she loved being on the porch. And I've mentioned before, that's why I'm on the porch. I always loved sitting with her on the porch. And it was that life lesson I learned from her of being still, of taking the time just to sit, reflect, share stories, ask questions. I used to love to ask her questions. Well, why did you do this? Or how did you do that? And she was always willing to share her story as a young girl growing up there in Alabama. Again, her growing up in a very country living aspect as well. But I loved spending time with her on the porch. And she was so honest. And those are my fondest memories of her, and how much she loved to laugh when she would tell stories. And she knew everybody. She knew who was related to who and who married who, or whatever those stories may have been. And of course, some scandalous ones as well mixed in. But she loved to tell stories like that. So we would sit either in a rocking chair or on the porch swing, and we would talk about those things. And I just really loved all that time that I spent with her. And so I also think of her at the holidays. And again, while her and my grandpa never came to visit us for Thanksgiving, we went back a couple times for Thanksgiving. But more importantly, it was just the stories that we would share as if they were really there with us. And that's the way it continues to be, even now that they're they've passed away. We continue to tell those stories and remember all those special moments and things we've all learned from different individuals in our family. And one of the big changes for us, as I've mentioned previously, is the passing of my brother, which was almost 2 years ago. And certainly he is most missed at our family gatherings. And what's wonderful, though, is we continue to remember just how special he was and the life lessons he taught us. And for me, it was just his authentic way of living. That despite his limitations as having some special needs, he always strove to find a way to do the things that he wanted to do and to overcome those challenges. And that's just been such a lesson for me. And to just sincerely be yourself and share your thoughts, emotions, and expressions. And I really learned that and treasure those lessons that he taught me in doing that. And, I think one of my fondest memories was a cruise that him and I took together. And as I've mentioned, he was just very authentic and just him. And anybody would be his friend. He was just that, warm and inviting of a person. So we went on a cruise and he met everybody. Everybody knew him. We'd walk around and it was just him and me on the cruise, and people would wave, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And they didn't know who I was, but they knew him, and they would invite him over to have a drink and what did you do today? And it was just watching that enjoyment that not only him, but the people he had met and becomes friends with on the cruise was just really just a remarkable experience and something that I try and remember because I don't just kind of walk up to somebody and say hello. So that was something that, I try to be a little more open and saying hello to people that I don't necessarily know. And I learned that from him. And I wanted to share a little bit too about, I mentioned my grandparents in Alabama and that they didn't come for Thanksgiving, but it was like they were always there. My dad always shared stories about my grandma and grandpa, how he was raised and the things they went and did, and the different work that they did on the property as he was growing up and how going to the store was such a big outing for them in the family. They had 5 children. My dad was the oldest, and going to the store was an event. But hearing those stories, I really just came to better understand my grandparents and feel as though while they weren't actually sitting at our table, they were always there. And those stories were just so enlightening and allowed me to come to know them better because I was only seeing them, every couple summers or so I would go and see them. So um, the fact that my dad and my mom, because we did live back there for a while, would share those stories with us and the rest of the family was very important. So again, the presence of somebody sitting there doesn't have to be just sitting there. Their presence, their importance, their contributions to your life are through the stories and the memories that we have. And I'm really thankful that I have so many of those that I remember, that I think about regularly, and that I'm happy to share with you in the hopes that it might open up some memories for you too about some of those individuals in your life. So, who will be at your family table this Thanksgiving? Even though they may not be there, allow some space for you to be able to share memories and things of that nature. And think about some of those individuals who have passed away, who won't be joining you at the table. But what lessons did they teach you? What do you remember as one of your fondest memories of spending time with them? What was their personality like for maybe those in your family who didn't know them? They continue to keep those stories going and always have those individuals with you and a reminder of what they contributed to your life. Maybe sharing an example of how they lived their life What did they enjoy most? What were their hobbies and dreams? And what do you think are some of their, they would think were some of their most important accomplishments? Things like that can all allow us to remember and appreciate more those interactions and connections we have with those individuals, and that they're not forgotten. So I mentioned earlier on that I would share an activity. So, at this Thanksgiving or holiday when you get together with your family, maybe try a new activity if you don't do something like this, of having each person seated at your table share some stories about one person in particular who's no longer with you. Why were that individual important to them? Sharing stories and funny interactions that you had, sharing with others at the table. So go around the table and ask each person, who would you like to share about? And certainly people could, duplicate somebody, but it's an opportunity for everybody to have their own expression and to share memories that they had. It's a great way, again, to keep the memory of lives of those who might not be with us. And maybe for those that are at your table who didn't know these individuals, they're going to be learning too about who these people were and why they were important in your life. So this might be an activity you'd like to do. So I think we're going to try and carve that time out, maybe while we're having dessert, for each of us to pick somebody who's no longer at our table this holiday season that we want to celebrate and share a story or a memory or a life lesson that they taught us. So I hope you'll consider that and enjoy that moment with your family in doing that. And maybe it becomes a new tradition for you and your family. Life lessons, we learn those through our own experiences or listening to stories of others, those in our family who have shared with us over the years. But, we take those lessons and apply them to our own life and keep that in mind. And maybe we change the way we do something because of what we learned from somebody else who'd gone through that experience in our family or the suggestion they may have given us. But those life lessons live on through us. We then have such an experience and we learn something through that process and we continue to share that with others. So continuing to pass along life lessons, I think, becomes a benefit generation after generation. And it's a great opportunity to provide insight and funny stories. The lessons we learn sometimes, at the time they might be, oh my gosh, what have I done, right? But, when you can look back and laugh on them and say, you know what I learned from that, I think that's important. And for us to share those, I think, is even more important. So I hope that you'll do that as well. When you consider some of the people in your life who have passed on and you think about those memories and what they contributed to your life, I invite you to share. I'm glad to share some of my relative stories here today, but I hope you'll share in the comments as well about who are some of those individuals that won't be there in person, but will be there in spirit and memory. That you'll be thinking about this Thanksgiving. I would love to hear some stories from some of you in the comments. So I invite you to please share if you'd like to. So, in closing today, I was thinking about this and Thanksgiving, and again, who is going to be able to join us. But you can't help but think about those that aren't with us any longer, and remembering those that came before us that really laid the groundwork for our lives and the lessons that they taught us, that they uh, through stories and activities that we did with them of just how important that is. And I'm glad to have shared a little bit about my family members who have passed on and what I'll be thinking about this year at Thanksgiving. And again, I hope this video today has you also considering some of those individuals in your life. So I wish you and your family the best of holidays. And I hope by being together, sharing stories, that all of us have a much richer and celebrated life. So thank you for watching. I'm Sweet Melba. I'll see you again for Sunday on the Porch. Bye bye.